What's going on, guys? It's Zach here, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. This one I'm going to go over the four teams in the AFC North and how their off seasons are going to help affect their fantasy impact going forward into 2023. So the teams I'll be catching on here are going to be the Bengals, Browns, Ravens, and Steelers. Most of these teams weren't super active this offseason, so I don't think this will be a very long video, but this will be the seventh video in this series. I've already touched on the AFC West and AFC South, along with the entire NFC, and then tomorrow I'll be uploading the AFC East video. That should be the final one here, and then we'll be rolling into the NFL draft on Thursday. And then after that, I'll be putting out some more Dynasty content and some videos that sort of outline how I think that NFL draft shapes what we're going to expect to see in fantasy this year. So yeah, these videos have been really fun. If you haven't watched the other ones, I do recommend you go take a look at those. I think that staying up to date with what's happening over the course of the off season is really going to give you an edge come the start of the actual season. So yeah, with that, let's get into the first team. So starting us off here with the Baltimore Ravens, they've not done a whole lot this offseason, although they've been in the headlines quite a bit. They added Odell Beckham Jr. and Nelson Aguilar to sort of bolster that wide receiver room. They also lost Sammy Watkins and Demarcus Robinson, and they also lost Kenyon Drake at running back position. Not a whole lot in terms of important losses here, but I think the important note to me really is that none of the receivers they added to me are going to be real game changers. I think they're still really banking on Rashad Bateman to be that number one, although they are paying Odell to be that. He's coming off of a second ACL injury. He's getting up there in age. I don't really expect Odell to be the contributor that they're expecting him to be. So I think this is still going to be a relatively subpar receiving room, although Mark Andrews is a great tight end. So I think Mark Andrews is still going to be the tight end two for me going into this season. I am operating under the assumption that Lamar Jackson will remain with Baltimore this season. But if that changes, obviously that's going to shake up things a whole lot in terms of fantasy for this team. Regardless, I think that we can expect to see Lamar Jackson, if he's here, to be a top five-ish quarterback going into the season, although injury is going to be a concern, but I think I'll be drafting him around quarterback five or six. For the receivers, I think that I personally would rank Rashad Bateman ahead of Odell Beckham. I think he's just a younger, better player, and he's got a bit more of a rapport with Lamar. We saw Rashad Bateman sort of come onto the scene a little bit last season before he left the season with that injury, so I expect Bateman to be their number one, Odell to be their number two in terms of the wide receiver position, but I don't really expect either one of them to be super useful on a week-to-week basis just because this is a relatively low passing volume offense, and neither one of them are really true alphas, I don't think. But this is going to be a new offensive system. It sounds like they changed offensive coordinators this offseason, so it's possible that they do sort of go into a more pass-heavy approach, and that could bolster the receiving and fantasy upside of every single player here. But regardless, I think for me, Mark Andrews is going to be really high on tight end. Lamar is going to be a top five quarterback. The rest of the receiving core between OBJ and Bateman is probably going to be on that fringe wide receiver two, wide receiver three category at best. And then at the running back position, J.K. Dobbins for me is going to be like a low end running back two. I just think that he doesn't catch passes, and then Gus Edwards gets enough work as well. That's tough to really count on him anything more than that. So yeah, moving on to the Cleveland Browns here, they haven't added a whole lot this offseason, though they did trade for Elijah Moore to sort of improve that wide receiver room. That's, for me, going to bump him into the wide receiver 2 or 3 category on this team. Obviously, Amari Cooper is going to be their number one wide receiver. They did lose Kareem Hunt and Dearness Johnson. They also lost Jacoby Brissett, so we're going to see, obviously, Nick Chubb be a true workhorse in this team. They have like Demetric Felton and really nobody else in terms of running back depth in this roster. I do expect them to maybe add one more body, but Nick Chubb's going to be the main guy here. He's obviously a really talented player. Nick Chubb's going to be a top 10 running back again this season just because of how talented he is. Obviously, this team is really banking on Deshaun Watson to really turn around this franchise and this offense. I think that Deshaun Watson is not going to ever quite get back to what he used to be, but I think he'll be better than he was last season. So I expect Deshaun Watson to be like a fringe quarterback one this season and be good enough to make Amari Cooper like a low end wide receiver two. And then personally, for me, I think that guys like Elijah Moore, Donovan Peoples-Jones, David Bell, the rest of the receivers really in general, none of those guys are going to be involved enough to really count on or really rely on from a fantasy perspective this season. But David Njoku did show enough last season. Deshaun Watson really seemed to have a bit of a rapport with him last season as well. So Njoku for me is going to be like a low end tight end one for me going into the season. Moving on to the Cincinnati Bengals, they have been a team that also hasn't been super active this offseason. They're obviously running into cap issues with just all the guys that they need to pay going forward. So it's not super shocking. They didn't really add a whole lot this offseason. They did add Irv Smith Jr. to sort of replace Hayden Hurst. I think personally Irv Smith Jr. is a really talented player. He's got a lot of burst in him. He's a pretty athletic tight end. And honestly, this is an offense that we saw Hayden Hurst perform really well in. So I think it is possible that we see Irv Smith sort of break out as like a post-hype sleeper at the tight end position. But I mean breakout, though. I think that's just going to put him into that like fringe top 10 category if he everything hits for him. So he's going to be a guy that you could take a dart throw on in your drafts this season, but I wouldn't expect too much out of him. They did lose Samaje Perine, and they also have been potentially rumored about potentially cutting Joe Mixon, maybe trading Joe Mixon as well. There have been some legal issues popping up with Joe Mixon, and obviously he's just a really expensive player for them. And like I said previously, they're running up against the cap, so it's been more than rumored that they could remove Joe Mixon from this roster, or at least ask him to take a pay cut. If they were to remove Joe Mixon, having already lost Samaje Perine, they would obviously have nobody on this team at the running back position. They have been linked to the team that could potentially sign Ezekiel Elliott. At pick 28, it's also possible that maybe they could sort of trade up and get Bijan if he's there. Maybe they get Jameer Gibbs at that point as well. But keep an eye on what they do during the draft. I think they're going to be a team that really does look to address the running back position going forward. I don't personally expect Joe Mixon to start the season as their running back one here, so whoever they end up filling that void with is going to be really awesome for fantasy, and it's just going to be important to keep an eye on who that is. And last but not least, here we've got the Pittsburgh Steelers. They've been honestly very inactive this offseason. They did recently trade for Allen Robinson. They did like a seventh round pick swap, and they're going to pay $5 million of his salary. I don't think this is news at all. If anything, it maybe eats into the hype for George Pickens in year two. Deontay Johnson's been a guy that I've personally not been super excited about either. He's a really talented player, but this is just going to be a pretty low passing volume offense. And there's just a lot of mouths to feed, and it's even more murky now with Allen Robinson. They've got pick 17, but they don't really have any needs on offense. They've got a really great tight end in Pat Freiermuth. They've got a pretty good receiving core in Allen Robinson, George Pickens, and obviously Deontay Johnson. And the running back room is really set with Jalen Warren and Najee Harris. And they're obviously going to go into the season with Kenny Pickett at quarterback. So I don't expect there to be a whole lot of fantasy turmoil or impact from the draft for this team. Honestly, the hope for this team going forward is that Kenny Pickett takes that year two leap. I personally am not super excited about Kenny Pickett going forward. I think he's going to be okay, and maybe this offense gets a little bit better, but I don't think it's going to be anything stellar. I do think that Najee Harris is going to have a bounce back season. We saw him really have a really solid second half of the season. I believe he was the running back 6 from like week 10 on, and I think that had a lot to do with him getting that plate removed from his foot. He had that Liz Frank injury that was bothering him during the offseason last year, and it sort of seemed to plague him during the first half of the season. But he looked a lot better during the second half of the season. I think he's going to be a guy that could be a discount going into drafts here. And I think I'm going to be mostly out on most of the receivers in this team. There's a lot of hypes and a lot of name value associated with all of them between Deontay, Allen Robinson, and George Pickens. But I think there's just going to be too many mouths to feed for this pretty low octane offense, and I'm not going to be really interested in any of them. So that's going to do it for the AFC North. Up next, I'll have the AFC East, where I'll cover the Patriots, Bills, Jets, and Dolphins. It's going to be the putting a wrap on our offseason recaps for each of these teams in the NFL. It's been really fun making these videos. I hope you guys have enjoyed them as well. If you got any questions or anything for me, feel free to let me know. I love interacting with all of you guys as much as possible. If you want to interact with me a little more, you can follow me on Twitter at RealSteelFFB. And if this is your first time on the channel, thank you for taking the time to watch the video. I'm glad you made it. If you do like the video, please do give it a thumbs up. It helps with the algorithm. And like I said, if it's your first time here, please do hit subscribe so you can get more videos when I put them out. You can click the bell so you get notifications as well. I've got something like 300 subscribers right now, and I'm really hoping to hit 1,000 this season. It's been a goal of mine for a while, and I think it's maybe a little ridiculous, but we'll see if we can get there. It'd be pretty fun to see if we can try. So, yeah, thank you guys so much, and I'll catch you next time.